Welcome to Prelude Chats, the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra. I'm Susan Wingrove-Reed. I am the education consultant for the symphony and also principal keyboardist. And I am really delighted to be with Elizabeth Schulze, our music director. And we're off to concert number 2 of our second season working together with Elizabeth. And what a program. I'm in awe of the structure and the inclusion of what is happening musically and the musical journey that this will take us all on, including the members of the orchestra as well as the audience. So Elizabeth, let's dive in and share some of your thoughts about how you put this program together and why these particular pieces, beginning with Quinn Mason, who was a real discovery as a young African-American living composer in our country.
I think Quinn Mason is one of the important voices of this century in terms of classical music, American classical music. He's young, he's 27 years old. He wrote this piece when he was 22. And in those 5 years in between, he has written so much more. And he is a growing artist and someone who I absolutely admire and really think that he will have a lot to say as the century progresses. What I admire about him is his curiosity. He was recognized as a 3-year-old as having musical talent, but he grew up in poor community, in underprivileged circumstances in many ways that would have kept a child, even of his extraordinary talents, down. And luckily, teachers and his mother and others encouraged him and fought for him and gave him opportunities. And he is quite extraordinary. So I wanted to bring him to the program because I think that he has something to say to the rest of the actual pieces of music that we're performing. I think when he was about 15 and he was starting to think about writing for large ensembles, he read about the music of William Grant Still and maybe heard about Florence Price. Not sure. She was sort of coming into the consciousness of American classical music because her works had been discovered in an attic in 2009 by people who were renovating an old house outside of Chicago that had been Florence Price's summer home. And they found these boxes of sheet music manuscripts. And instead of throwing them away in the dumpster, they decided to look more deeply into them and figure out what this all was. And it eventually found its way to University of Arkansas and to G. Schirmer, the great music publisher. And now we play Florence Price regularly on our concerts. But for a young man of less than privileged circumstances, to see modeled before him 2 amazing American composers who had to fight the issues of racism, exclusion, and also sexism. I think he saw in their success, in their endeavors, and in their beautiful results musically, the shoulders on which he could stand, and also gave him a certain kind of permission to go forth. And this can't be discounted in music education when we reflect all the peoples who have sought to join a conversation in what we call classical music and world music. If we exclude any voice, we are dimming the chances for music to go forward for centuries, to be meaningful to people, and to offer opportunities for voices that we wouldn't expect to arise and to inform us and inspire us and entertain us as well. So that's why I chose Quinn Mason's piece. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to mention that I was taken by an interview that he gave where he said when he was 10 years old, he went to a young people's concert. Mm-hmm. And the Dallas Symphony was playing. And he said that was an absolutely life-changing moment. And so that makes me want to take our own moment and to celebrate that the Anchorage Symphony is committed to young people's concerts and outreach so that we can provide that live being in a concert hall experience, there are more Quinn Masons out there.
Oh,
Boys
absolutely. I mean, that's the incredible thing, and that's our mission. Certainly has been my mission. I was talking to teachers yesterday who are preparing the link up music with their students, so that the students can come to the Atwood Theater and collaborate with the orchestra in these fabulous opportunities. These are joint concerts with the students of Anchorage. And I said to them that their input to the Carnegie Hall program, the teachers' input, allowed more world music to enter these link-up programs, so that we hear from peoples and voices of today, and also from all over the world. Last year we did a piece from an Indian from India, and this year we have Israeli music and Spanish music, and it just, it's always opening to conversation. So this is a conversation among, I think, substantial American musical voices, talking to each other, reflecting each other, challenging each other. I think Quinn Mason, what I really enjoy about his piece is that you can tell he's heard all these great works, and that they are like, wow, everything's wow. And he's taking some of the effects, the color that he's hearing, because I think he hears in colors and feelings, and he's immediate in the way that he reacts and puts his music down on the page. The first, it's a 3-part. It's called a joyous trilogy, and it starts with running. So you have that motoric music of the minimalists, of Beethoven, of Rossini. You have that running music going on, but then at the same time, he's hearing deep into the music, to hear the different rates of change. And you hear he gives other instruments slow music that you become aware of, as if you're running and you're seeing something, or you're watching a horizon. He creates, in some ways, a total experience of running. But it could also be motoric. It could also be about a machine. It could be about all kinds of running. It could be water. Could be so many different things. But he gives us that sense. The middle movement is called, and all of these movements flow one into the other. The middle movement's reflection. He's a prayerful person. He was raised in a religious background and fervor, and he understands introspection and quiet, and the need for that in an exalting way to produce beauty and to produce his vision. And that immediately moves us into the final movement, which is called renewal. And this one is the most joyous. I just find it's a personal journey, clearly, in some ways. But it's also a reflection on other compositional journeys. The symphonic form, just a sense of putting a problem, reflecting on it, and changing it, making it come out triumphant, much like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. But he sees things so differently than we do. We're all mired in years of history and expectations. And what I love about him is that he's taking all of these things and going, yeah, okay, because he went to school, he did music history and theory and all those things like that. But but we're missing some things. So this is what I'm seeing, and this is how I'd like to make my music, using some of the materials that I've heard that I really like, but make it into something new and personal. And that's what he does. That's what every great composer does anyway. So I have high hopes for him. I have high hopes, and I'm glad to bring his music to Anchorage audiences, as you can tell with my passion about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, so we are going to experience Quinn Mason for the first time in Anchorage. Mm-hmm. And then Florence Price returns to our stage. And I've described this as a piece that I've yearned to hear performed live ever since I'd heard of its existence. And it's going to be such a historic and beautiful opportunity for our audiences to experience Florence Price's piano concerto.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece of music. It's absolutely enjoyable. The audience will love it. It is so chock full of ideas. You know, we talked about Quinn, but I will say this, and if I already said this, I apologize. But you know, Quinn Mason discovered Florence Price and William Grant Still at a young age, and it was their music and their life stories and their strength at breaking through barriers and persisting that gave him permission. He felt permission to enter this world and of classical music and participate as a composer. So it makes a lot of sense to have a young African American voice who is, he himself will say, standing on the shoulders of two of the great American composers who were African American, Florence Price and William Grant Still. And so they're represented on this program. The Price Piano Concerto, what amazes me is the inventiveness of it. To think that it only was performed probably by her, maybe Margaret Bonds, her friend and wonderful composer in her own right, a couple times in her lifetime, and then disappeared, with no chance for a lot of revision or, you know, of afterthought and making sure all the notes are right in the orchestra and all of that kind of thing. And then it was lost until it was found in that attic in 2009, as those people were redecorating and discovered these boxes in the attic. And instead of throwing them away, they looked inside, thank God. And those were manuscripts by Florence Price that had been thought lost forever. And a version that our guest artist, Karen Walwyn, played early on was a reconstructed concerto accompaniment. The piano part had been around, I think, in a 2-piano arrangement. It had been around. But the orchestra parts were scattered and found, I guess, and then the score was reconstructed from orchestra parts that were around. And then when they discovered these boxes, they found the actual score. And it's amazing. And what was more amazing was that the reconstruction was very close to what the composer Florence Price actually had intended. And so Karen Walwyn's going to be playing the actual version that Florence Price put down to paper from her orchestra score. Although she and I may decide to include a few things that showed up in the orchestra parts that weren't in Florence Price's score, but since they were in the orchestra parts, it makes you think that maybe at a rehearsal she said add that in or something like that. So we have to talk about that. These are the problems when voices get lost, when music is undervalued and just thrown away, discarded or forgotten. This is what happens. You lose the actual text. And so it's been painstaking for scholars over the beginning of this 20th century to revive these fantastic voices such as Florence Price's. And really, I can't think of a more worthy composer. She just is wonderful. Again, this, like the trilogy, it's a 3-part, almost 4-part concerto that moves one movement into the other. There's no division. It's called concerto in one movement, but it has sections that point to a fast, slow, fast structure, very much like the Joyous trilogy of Quinn Mason's. Different music completely, however. And this was music that was written in the 30s, really reflecting on who Florence Price was. We will hear what you hear in the piano. It just shows you what a great pianist she actually was. It's formidable, it's hard, it's beautiful, it's lush, and it harkens back to the early 20th century great artists, the Rachmaninoffs, and all of that pianism, that great lush, beautiful, and very difficult virtuosic writing. And she pulls all of that technique in to serve her story, which involves yes, involving the songs of her slave ancestors, but also um, she was a woman of the early 20th century, and so jazz was arriving, and you hear a little bit of Charleston, you hear cakewalk, you hear all of the popular dance rhythms and little snippets. You even hear a little bit of a jazz band, a little bit with the snare drum and trumpet and things like that, especially in the third movement, which just jaunts away. It's just fantastic. I love it. Slow movement is a deep song that you can imagine her friend Marian Anderson singing. It's just a beautiful, beautiful. It's a dialogue between the piano and the oboe for a long time, which is just a wonderful pairing, actually. And then the first movement has marches, and again, this great torrent of piano playing, a lot of cadenza kind of commentary, and then the orchestra takes the cue from the piano. It starts out with a slow introduction, but it's a very short one, and it has a lot of kind of a jazzy blues kind of beginning, a questioning kind of opening. Again, very inventive, taking the form. It wasn't that one movement concertos didn't exist before she wrote it. Right. Obviously they did, but using that condensed form to really create a story, a journey for the listener through the pianism of this work, starting with every possible kind of musical idea that has been appealing or recognizable, I think, in the 20th century, early 20th century, marches, dances, songs. She's reflecting her times. And that's what I think is so remarkable. I wish that she had lived a little bit longer. She would have been able to be treated so much, for high blood pressure, all those things that brought on her stroke at 66. What a loss to the musical world. She was just on the cusp of international recognition. She was going off to Europe, where they were performing her works, especially in Britain and also in France. They were fascinated by her and were very much interested in performing her works, and didn't have the same kind of automatic bias that America seemed to have in the 1950s. And she died in 1953. Just before the next two works on the program were written. And I would have loved to have had the opportunity to have her engage with the Copland and the William Grant Still of the late 50s, because that's a very different time. Music is reflecting on now a whole world war. She was close to it, but she was still using, in the piano concerto, it's in the 30s. It's before all that time. So it would have been great to have heard her a little bit more post World War II. I think she would have had even more incredible things to say. So now we come on to the next two works, who I paired specifically. I discovered William Grant Still's Serenade. I was looking for music for young people, and I discovered this work. It was written for a high school orchestra in Montana in 1950. I don't remember exactly, 56, 57, somewhere around there. And it's a formidable work. It's gorgeous. And again, like many African-American composers, they felt compelled to bring their life story and their background. And so using the songs of enslaved peoples in the United States was a way to enter in and a way to give a sort of identity to their music. And Florence Price used it, not always. And so did William Grant Still, not always, but often, especially in lyrical moments, because these were their songs. So why shouldn't they? They're beautiful. So why not? It's great music. So I found this piece very interesting because, this is a piece where he is trying to teach a young orchestra how to play beautiful music, how to play it well. And yet he's not dumbing it down. He's not making it easy peasy. It's not all whole notes and all of those things like that. It's hard music. It goes through very difficult keys. it really challenges, but it also is a reflection on music played by young people in the United States in the 1950s. I know that my mother lived in Pittsburgh, and she played in an orchestra. She was a pianist, and she played in an orchestra that, as the first violinist, well, there was Lorne Mazel. So, I mean, the level of music making at the high school age across this country, not always, not in every pocket, but in many, was extraordinary, because so many of the European musicians that either escaped during World War II or came earlier, like my ancestors came in the late 19th century. They were all educators, all teachers, and so music teachers, and so they, went across the country, Ohio and West, and so you have these pockets of unbelievable. I mean, everywhere you find a symphony, like an Anchorage symphony, or in Montana, you find Billings and Bozeman, and you find symphonies. Why? Because there were great teachers there and great people who played music there. And the high school players stayed at home and continued and played in their orchestras. I mean, I am so pleased that the Anchorage Symphony has a number of people in it that played in the Anchorage Youth Symphony. This is an incredible thing. But this is an American thing. It's European too. I mean, people passed on from conservatory, went into the major orchestras. But here, it is a community sense, people who are reinvesting in their musical life and reinvesting by using their talents to give back to their community through their art. So it's really I think it's a kind of very unique American phenomenon. So this piece was written for that level, a very high level of young musician, in order to instruct and teach about how do you play music that is really romantic, but how do you play something that is a beautiful song? How can you be so lyric? So this is a very lyric piece. It's called a serenade. It has some different, it goes through some different tempos, but it is in general a slow, beautiful, thoughtful, entertaining piece, just glorious piece. And his good friend Howard Hanson, if you know Howard Hanson's music at all, his Romantic Symphony, the second movement, this serenade by William Grant Still, it has that same kind of beautiful, what we would think of as an evening song. So that's what this piece is an evening song. And again, it just offers us an appreciation of an American musician who he himself was a fantastic musician, a player. I think he played oboe and many of the wind instruments. He played for Paul Whiteman. He arranged for Paul Whiteman. He knew Gershwin, and probably Gershwin took "I Got Rhythm" from a melody that Grant Still played for him. Never attributed it, but whatever. So William Grant Still has a very storied life. What amazes me is, while he's about six years younger than Florence Price, they grew up in the same neighborhood in Little Rock, in the same neighborhood. These two towering voices were so close. They had similar education. They knew the same people. When they were kids, they were mentored by the same music teachers. And wow, it's just an incredible history there. Yeah. And after she died, we did the canebrake stances for, I think last year or 2 years ago, we played a piece of music that was arranged by William Grant Still, that from piano works by Florence Price, because he wanted to make sure that her music still lived after her passing, and provide perhaps even a little income for her kids, her two daughters at the time. So yeah, they were friends, they were colleagues, and they respected each other clearly. And they were important voices. It's very important for us to know that they were highly regarded in their lifetime.
Yes.
They didn't have the same kind of championing that some of the composers that we hear more from did. In other words, they weren't deep friends with conductors or major artists. in that would carry their music forward. This is an important thing that people forget, is that, you know, if you make friends with a conductor who is younger than yourself, you can bet that your music is probably going to live past you and be taught to generations past you. But if you're not, you know, if you are not able to have that relationship with the next generation of rising musicians, partly because of racism, partly because, let's be honest, the music of Florence Price and, well, first of all, she died early in the 50s, right when music was starting to turn against audiences. Who cares if you listen? That kind of thing was being written by composers in these polemics that music went in a decidedly different direction, one that was has much to be admired formally, and even with the experiments in sound and all of that. I, you know, totally understand it, respect it, but it isn't really audience friendly. And so I think the end of the 50s was the last bastion time where you could get away with a melody and an accompaniment, and not be apologizing for it as you would in the 60s and onward. I mean, even in the 1950s, it was beginning to be a little bit thought of as old-fashioned. Music needed to be confrontational and needed to be harder than you can imagine. It you know, it needed to have every single player on stage playing different rhythms and different melodies or different relationships. It was a different kind. It was a Jackson Pollock painting, you know, where you're going to make it of it what you make of it. If you see patterns in it, that's great. If you don't, you're missing out. That's your problem. That kind of attitude really, well, it didn't do us any favors in the orchestral world, that's for sure. So that's my polemic. I am a child of Bernstein, you know, who was not a big fan, a big fan of music that didn't have something to say to audiences directly. Which is not to say that contemporary music in the late 20th century didn't have something to say. Certainly they did. There are many, many masterpieces, but they're difficult. They're difficult and confrontational. And you can't expect someone who's coming in for just 2 hours of their evening once or twice a year to somehow come along with you when you're writing all this complex stuff. So, but all of that was forgotten. And, you know, art takes very many different directions, and we need it all. We need all the voices to contribute. So finally, we come from this beautiful serenade to Appalachian Spring, which is, I think, one of, you know, kind of like Hopper's painting. Was it Hopper's painting? the guy with the pitchfork and his wife. Grant Wood, that Grant Wood painting of the farmer and his wife. You know, Appalachian Spring has that kind of iconic, oh my God, that's real America, which is so interesting because it was basically a ballet for Martha, and the plot was sort of not necessarily the Appalachian Spring was not Martha's. Appalachian Spring was put on it from a Hart Crane poem, which tells the story of Pocahontas and her lover, Mikiquat. So completely different source in terms of the title. I don't know whether the plot of the story, the young people looking to life together and being informed by religion and experience in the characters of a pastor and a mother figure, a wise woman figure. I don't know whether that was in her head already and she told him about that. I don't know for sure which came first.
What I read, which touched me to read it, because I did this play with my students at Bartlett when our new theater, which the voters had approved a bond for, opened. We opened with Our Town by Thornton Wilder, because it's a traditional opening a new theater space play. And my students just fell in love with it. And Martha Graham, when she was initially conversing with Copeland about it, was reflecting on the influence of that gentle story and that emotion of reality in the characters of that play. And so that's something that that is in my mind when I hear the music now of it really did influence where she was going in terms of the innocence and the beauty of human beings in a it's not a simple time, but it's just that there's simple goals in life. You know, we're going to be married, we're going to be in our community, we're going to give to our community and be.
Yeah. Again, stories that couldn't be told in the 60s, but definitely could still be told in the 50s. So this was about 1957, 58, this piece. Am I right, or is it earlier,
No,
1950?
it was during World War II.
I'm sorry, it's 47. It's 47, yeah. Right.
No, and
it's
it
47.
was done,
yeah.
It was premiered in 1944. So it also touched a strain in the public of there's hope. The Allies are looking like we're going to win. There was just this emotional occurrence of this beautiful music and the dance and all of it. But it was a World War II piece.
Right. I'm mixing my decades
Sure.
up here.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, and that makes much more sense when you look at the choreography of Martha Graham, because her choreography is very different in this piece in 1940. So the music itself, there are moments where it goes with the plot really, really well. And sure. Those moments are the ones that he cut out of the suite that we're performing, which is where the couple are told of, all the things that could happen and the things that they need to be aware of, and the dangers and, the obstacles ahead. That's thorny music. That's Copland at his thorny best. But in the music that he saved for the suite and that he put together for the suite, it roughly follows the story exactly. I mean, in terms of the action on stage, most of the music just goes from the beginning to the end. The beginning, this opening of just chords on top of chords moving upward. My teacher, Murray Sidlin, was visiting Copland in the 80s, and this was before he died, but when he was in the throes of dementia. And he had gone with some other musicians, to other people, to visit him and speak to him about a project that Murray was doing. He wanted to do a reduction of one of Copland's operas that didn't get heard very often, for 13 instruments, was the same instrumentation as Appalachian Spring was originally for Martha Graham. And we're doing the full orchestra version, which is a different animal in some ways, still magnificent, but different. And he sat at the piano. This is the composer. Copland was sitting at the piano, and he didn't really seem very engaged. And all he did was these chords that you hear at the beginning of Appalachian Spring. He played them over and over and over again. And what my teacher told me was, this, in some ways, was Copland. It was haunting, because they are simple and yet complex, because they're two tonalities on top of each other, but they sound so beautiful, and they are like blossoming, always opening up. We always think of Copland's music, all that Western music, with the opening of the plains, the opening of America, the moving westward. We've associated that, even though he was, lived in New York. I mean, his mom was from Texas, so that makes sense. But he was a very urban, very, just refined and sophisticated composer who, but in his inside, the thing that seemed to reflect his musical soul was just these openings of chords, this resonance that allows for any direction. That's what makes it so incredible, because when you put two kinds of chords on top of each other, you can go anywhere from that. You can go to another two chords, you can go to another, just the possibilities, and it in a resonant and a way that takes you along the journey, as opposed to imposing 12 tones. that kind of thing, but rather allowing the overtone series, which has in itself some conflict, when things are going like that in overtones. So you do have that going on, but it's all natural, it's all physical, it's all physics as opposed to imposed. So this is to me, when I approach the beginning of Appalachian Spring, in which all the characters in the ballet are introduced to the audience, they all come out and take their place. You realize, no, this is of course Martha's ballet, but it's also Aaron Copland. And it's anytime that music comes, it gives me chills to realize that that's what he was left with as he was sinking into dementia. This stayed with him. Not all the Fanfare for the Common Man or any of the other great works that he wrote, just this opening over and over and over throughout their meeting, which lasted quite a while. And I'll never forget that story. And I think it's important to realize that, and I think of Schumann, who of course was going mad, and sounds were in his head, and he could hear, chords going on that he couldn't write down, just this diminishing, and yet music stays with you. And what is the music that stays with you, that is at your core? And this is where Copland was at the end of his life, playing the beginning of Appalachian Spring.
There's a poignancy to that too. Just hearing the story, I had just read that a reviewer was saying that the opening of Appalachian Spring has probably the most profoundly moving or instrumental portrayal of a sunrise that's ever been scored, and that sunrise theme idea about the repetition of these chords is just very poignant to think of that.
Yes, absolutely. It's also a very, very subtle reflection on the First Symphony of Mahler. That A, of course, for Appalachian or whatever you want to think about that, but that's how just that sound, that's exactly what you hear at the beginning of Mahler's First Symphony. So it evokes a lot of things. And that's, we go back to Quinn Mason, he'll evoke a lot of things. You'll go, oh, that's Respighi, or oh, that's Stravinsky, or oh, that's John Williams, or oh, that's Lynn Wheda picked up another person whose name I can't remember, but he was like, oh yeah, that sounds like, Michael Torkey. I mean, just wonderful. And here is Copland, also looking back, as did Florence Price, as did Mr. Still, when he's trying to teach young people genres of music, but also make a beautiful piece of music. And that's the same thing with Copland. He's making a ballet, but he's also writing something that's deeper than even the ballet. The ballet becomes richer because of the music, I think. Yes. And yet it also stands apart from the music. There's a lot of the choreography that doesn't move exactly with the music or anything. And that's very modern. I mean, when you think of Merce Cunningham or any of the others that came after Martha Graham, the music was there. It was another artifact, and so was the dance. And they happened... And the interaction was almost a coincidence. That's later. That's not Martha Graham, but because she's telling stories. But the piece itself tells a certain kind of story. There's a lot of square dance music. There's a lot of the music that we would expect from Copland from his rodeo times, or rodeo times. Rodeo is how he would have pronounced it. And because it was Mexican, it was supposed to be, south of the border kind of idea. And it took off in Wyoming. So I think that this is, for me, this is one of the greatest pieces that I have ever had the privilege to encounter. It is profound. It somehow evokes maybe a constructed view of the American soul, of the American experience, certainly white immigrant experience. But it touches deep. I hope it can touch deeper because of its sheer beauty. The use of folk melody and and the square dance things, but also the beautiful song "Simple Gifts" from the Shaker folks. The words to that are absolutely glorious and true today, and that simplicity that you're talking about. It is of its time, written in, as you say, in the world, right in the throes of World War II. So this idea of preserving something, even as we're losing a generation to war, to preserve what is good, what is strong, what is the most essential. And I think that in many ways, this music still captures that in its stillness and also in certain complexities. Whenever it's complex, and believe me, there are movements that are as complex as Rite of Spring in terms of counting for the orchestra. I mean,
Yes.
crazy multimeter. Every bar has a different length kind of feeling. At the same time, he writes it as a scherzo. And don't forget, Appalachian Spring, Rite of Spring. I mean, is this his answer to the Rite of Spring in some ways, to get to the man and woman? In the Rite of Spring, a woman for fertility and whatever is killed at the end. But here we bring two people together to look forward. The last gesture of Martha Graham is a kind of pointing to the horizon, with her husband standing behind her, and she's pointing out to the future. It's hopeful. It's not death, and it is a statement after World War II. I mean, during World War II, hope and the future. But I mean, Appalachian Spring, Rite of Spring, especially in these moments of complexity musically, and yet he wants it all scherzo. And it is in those moments that Martha Graham is dancing. She's a young woman, still almost a girl in the way that she portrays herself, which is amazing, because she must, at least in the 1960 TV or whatever, 50 something TV. And that's why I was thinking 57, because I think it was a 1957 TV program. And she's still dancing the young girl, but she still conveys it. She's amazing. She's kind of like Margot Fontaine doing the Romeo and Juliet with the great Nureyev. She was able to evoke a young child even as she's in her 50s. Just wow. And so you have all this complexity going on, but you also have this young woman dancing with glee and flirtatious and beauty and power in her own right, and joy. And that's what I think is so compelling about the music, because even though it is like a tricky the orchestra's sweating bullets, the music itself just rises above and stays effortless. So I could talk for hours about this music, because to me it is us, and it is reflections of us at a snapshot in time that allows us to understand who we have been and what our great hopes were for the future. It also is a snapshot in time of now, almost now, 2017, with Quinn Mason. He is our future, and we're giving him voice, which is an important thing in his process as a composer. And we are also, I hope, helping this marvelous revival of the voice of Florence Price, a further recognition of the greatness of William Grant Still, a magnificent composer, whose symphonies I hope we can explore in future years. My goal, and I say it here, is also to play Florence Price's Third Symphony, which I think is possibly her masterpiece.
Yeah.
When I heard it first, I literally wept with joy, because I was hearing a new voice I hadn't heard before, and was absolutely as compelling as any of my beloved composers, Brahms or Beethoven or any of those marvelous composers had written. To me, this was speaking to me. So I hope that we'll be able to continue our journey as we explore the music of Florence Price over the seasons, as we have committed to do. Randy Fleischer committed to do that, and I was happy to take on that and continue that exploration. This is a concert not to be missed. We have a fantastic guest artist, Karen Walwyn, who is a scholar of the music of Florence Price. She has recorded several of Florence Price's works for piano, and she has played the concerto ever since its been revived, and now in the more, I guess we would just call it the version that Florence Price put down to actually put down on the page rather than a reconstruction. So we'll have a lot of wonderful challenges in our rehearsals just to get the flavor of this kind of music, because it's not it, the one thing I will say, these snapshots in time need to be played as if they are of that time. This is my feeling, is that we have to get the lightness and the fleetness of 1920s jazz, which is a very different thing than 1930s, very different thing than 1940s or 50s or 60s or 70s or now. You know, just like any genre of music, it changes over time. Different people playing and different things happening in the world. So it's going to be a real challenge and an exciting one, I think, for our orchestra, a real journey through through American music, through some of the monuments of American music, as well as the music of today.
And I wanted to throw in that to just personalize this a little bit more about a couple of human beings involved with this process of putting this concert together. Karen is very, very deeply committed to outreach and will be going into some of our schools to share stories and music with students and teachers. And Quinn Mason shares that he's just a total outreach committed person as a composer, et cetera. It's an important element of what an orchestra does, that artists like this can be out in our communities. And I wanted to also just go back on something you had brought up that we're all very proud of in the orchestra, which is that there are generations continuing and cycling through from young people who then come back and then are in part of the orchestra. And just an example of that, there were auditions in September for vacancies in our orchestra, and there were some pretty significant retirements this year. One of them was Charmin Piper, who had been our principal oboe for over 40 years and a wonderful colleague and committed player. And our new principal oboe is doing his first performance at this concert. And he is a product of the Anchorage School District, a West High graduate, has gone off and gotten degrees and is back home, and he is our new principal oboe. And that's just one example of the continuity factor of that we have music programs in our schools, that we have commitment of teachers in the orchestra and in the community to bring skills to students, and that this is a lifelong thing, that you can play your instrument or sing for your entire life, not just in school. So we welcome.
No, absolutely. It is. And that is part of the American perspective. As I said earlier, you know, young William Grant's still writing a piece for a youth orchestra that Great Falls, Montana, I think it is. Well, there's a Great Falls Symphony there. Why? Because those kids in that high school that learned how to play music from William Grant Still and others that wrote music for them, as well as the great masters, they stayed and they built. And that is America. That is the American orchestra across this country. Yes, there are the big five or whatever you want to call them. There's major orchestras that are full time. But to me, the great magic of America is that even small communities, if there are devoted musicians who are teaching and want to pass along this great art, they create these orchestras in small communities as well. And music lives because of that. And that doesn't happen in Europe in the same way as it happens here in the community, because it's community driven and it's community funded, and it's, you know, it is a reflection of who we are as a community. And so Anchorage has a rich history with the youth orchestra, and the fact that so many young people from that orchestra are now finding their way into positions with the Anchorage Symphony is, for me, very heartening and exciting. And yes, indeed, we have a number of people in the orchestra that are from the Anchorage Symphony over the years. Anchorage Youth Symphony, excuse me, over the years. But I mean, that's incredible.
But not necessarily the Youth Symphony. That has been one important integral.
Yes, that's true. That's true. No question about that. From the school system as well. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
an orchestra and band and choir program at all levels in our schools isn't a rarer thing than it should be in America these days.
Yeah.
Well, we need to fight to hang on to that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you 100% about that. There's no question. And that's the kind of thing that, like, my mother grew up with a chorus and an orchestra and a band. It wasn't even a question. I did too. I was very privileged to do that, but that is not the going rate in most communities. And I will just say that had to be revived when I got to Maryland, where I live. There weren't orchestras or programs in the elementary schools. Now there are, but it had to be fought for and revived, and needed people to speak for it. So we are very lucky here in Anchorage to have committed, amazing music teachers, amazing young musicians who are willing to reinvest in this town and pass it along, pass it forward.
So there's a lot to celebrate on November the 4th at this Do Not Miss concert. Wonderful program, and we're just the orchestra is just ecstatic about the preparation process, and here we go. So come November 4th and see what our Anchorage Symphony Orchestra is up to. And we'll share music between us, audience and players. Thank you so much.
That's the important thing. Thank you.